artists. Today we're going to be drawing either pumpkins, a gourd, or even squash as our subject, and I'm going to show you how to create some interest just by using a different perspective and by using value in your picture. So all you're going to need is a paper, a pencil to start, and later on some colored pencils or crayons. Even chalk would work. So let's get our supplies and let's get started. All right, so I've got a piece of paper. This is not a really large piece of paper. I think it's an 8 by 8 inch paper. If you want to make it larger, you could, or even if you want to make it a little bit smaller. I've got some colored pencils. We're not going to use every single color in this colored pencil, but what we want to do is create first, before we worry about color, we're going to create an interesting composition by changing the perspective. Perspective means your point of view, how you are looking at the object. So today, instead of just looking at a pumpkin from the side, we are going to look down from the top. And there's a couple rules. You don't have to show the whole pumpkin. In fact, I think it's better if you don't. And the other thing is you don't want to start right in the middle. If you always start right in the middle, it can be kind of boring, especially if everyone's doing that. So trying to start off center would be a little bit more interesting. And so what I'm going to do is show you how to draw the stem first of the pumpkin. So we're going to be looking down, just like the pictures I was showing you right before we got started here. All right, so I'm going to draw the stem first, and I think I'm going to put mine right here. Not right in the middle. I'm going to kind of go up a little bit with my stem. And sometimes stems are twisted, sometimes they're turned. Drawing lightly so that if I decide and I want to change my mind, I can. Now we're drawing it kind of a little from the top, but it's also a little bit sideways. All right, so where it attaches into the pumpkin, we want to put the base of the stem. And I do that by kind of making almost like a star, something with little points. Then I'm going to change this and curve it out. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, I think the less perfect it looks, actually the more it's going to look like a pumpkin. I'm going to make kind of a box on the end of this, because usually pumpkin stems are not perfectly shaped. Okay, now the stem is probably the hardest thing that we will do in this whole picture today, honestly. I'm going to add a little texture on it, maybe some lines to kind of show the direction that it is growing. Maybe a couple little speckly spots there. All right, now from here we're going to draw the pumpkin ridges. Now if you'd rather, some pumpkin, or it doesn't even have to be a pumpkin, some squash will even start this way. So if you want to draw a different type of squash, you can, but if you're doing kind of a pumpkin like I am, I'm going to draw some lines, and you're not only going to go from the point, I'll start by going from the points. I'm going to draw curves. And now when I get on this side, the side where my stem is growing, I might change this up. Instead of going all the way across my paper, which I could still do that. Maybe I could do a little bit right here. Instead of doing that, there's some of these little ridges that might be hiding behind, and I might just be looking at the edge of my pumpkin. So I'm going to make it kind of go down like that. So you can kind of see the edge of my pumpkin. And if you feel like you want to add a couple more lines in between, if it feels like it needs that, then go ahead and do that. Now, it's okay if you leave this corner blank. It's okay not to fill the whole space, but the goal today is to fill most of the paper. You want to have more than half of the picture covered with either your squash, your gourd, or your pumpkin. You want to start with the stem and then draw the lines that radiate out. Now, if you remember looking back at my pictures, I had a lot of fun taking pictures. I went to many different places that were selling pumpkins, and you can just see there's just so many different ways to draw this, different varieties and colors of gourds and pumpkins and squash. So I'm going to do the traditional to start with, which is an orange pumpkin. You'd think I'd start with orange, but actually I am going to start with brown, and I'm going to go over my lines and thicken them just a little bit with my brown. Now, because I'm doing an orange pumpkin, I'm going to stick with the colors right next to orange on the color wheel. So I'll show you what I mean here in just a moment. Let me finish kind of making these lines. So this is kind of the first thing. Now I decided not to use black for a couple of reasons. You don't usually see black on a pumpkin unless it is rotting. I don't want a rotten pumpkin. And also brown is a little bit warmer of a color, and warm colors are traditionally, for a traditional pumpkin, which is what I'm drawing here. Like I said though, if you feel like you want to experiment with a different color of your pumpkin, you can. You just have to remember a couple rules. And the rules are, you want to use colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel. I think I'm going to even have my stem down here outlined. And a lot of times there's a little brown mixed in with the green. So I'm going to go over these lines as well with my brown. It's more of a color that you would see in nature is brown than you would see black. All right, so make sure those lines are nice and thick and smooth. You don't want to have jaggedy lines or scribbly looking lines. When I'm doing it, I'm kind of doing long strokes. And that way, and I'm making sure this color is nice and dark, but that way it kind of guarantees that they won't get lost in my picture. Okay, so now I'm going to use the warm colors for my picture, and it depends on what you're using and whether it's crayons, colored pencils, or chalk. I have colored pencils here, and if you look, we've got some colors right next to each other here, and if you were actually looking at a color wheel, you would see it starting with yellow, then it would go to orange, then to red. This is almost like a red-orange. Yep, it even says red-orange on mine. And then I've got my regular red. So I'm actually going to work kind of backwards here. I'm going to start with my darkest color. I'm not doing the stem right now. We'll get back to that in a minute. But I'm going to start with this. And I'm going to just put right next to here. I don't want to get this scribbly. And I don't need to do this super dark. I can always go back and darken. This is very much like when we did our value scales. Value scales showed how you can make a color darker and lighter. And at the bottom we were mixing hues. And so this is kind of what we're going to do today. We're going to start with a dark value right next to the lines. And maybe even right here by the stem. I'm going to have a dark value. And then I'm going to let it fade out. Kind of just real light now in this section. Now, you could do that to all the sections, or you can do get a whole section complete and then move on to the next, which is what I'm going to show you how to do. And so now I'm going to take my orange and I'm overlapping the orange and the red where it was a really light red. Now I'm going to let that fade and do a light value in kind of towards the middle here. And depending how much red, some pumpkins are really red, some gourds are very red orange, and some are more yellow orange. So if you want less red and more orange or more yellow, you can kind of do that. But whatever you do for your pumpkin, you kind of want to stick with that for the whole thing. All right, I'm going to use my yellow, and I'm going to blend some yellow in here for the lightest value. And the neat thing about yellow is you can overlap that with all your colors and it should work. I think warm colors are some of the easiest to work with because no matter what happens, they always blend nicely together. And I just think they have a very nice feel. Now, I'm going to do this for all of them, so let me repeat my directions. I'm going to start with the red. I don't think I started with this very dark red on that one, so maybe I'll go back and add that. Just a little touch of that. So I'm going to add some dark red right next to my lines. Even a little bit on top of the brown line would be fine to do. So red is going to work as our darkest value. All right, now I'm going to use this orange red, orange. Maybe a little bit more down here on the edge. Like there's a little bit of a shadow. Some in here by the stem, darker by the stem, This line did not go all the way up to the top, so I think I'll work on this line at the same time. This side, so they look like they belong together. So do your red, darkest by the line. And remember, when you're coloring either with colored pencil or crayon, to not get scribbly. And one way to help it from getting scribbly is to kind of color in the same direction. I'm kind of curving with the shape of the pumpkin, and that kind of really helps it seem like the pumpkin is curving. I'm going to color right on top of that red with my orange now. We're going to blend those two together, and I'm going to let it fade a little. I like to leave just a little bit in the middle where it's just blank, so you can see some of that yellow mixing. You see just a yellow highlight right there. So this is a lot like gradual. Well, I feel like I need some more red down here in this corner. So if you are using colored pencils, smaller paper like this does keep it from taking quite so long. You don't have to push super hard. And remember, at any time, if it feels like you need to go back and add a little bit more dark, it's just something you got to kind of feel. Sometimes if you sit back from your artwork for a minute and just look at it from across the room, you can feel where it might need a little more orange or a little more red. All right, now I'm going to go in with my yellow, overlap it with the oranges and the reds, and just put that right in the middle. And if it feels too yellow in the middle, you can always go back and add a little orange. You can even go back if it feels like your brown needs to be a little darker in some places. Go back and make that a little darker. All right, so I'm going to work on the rest of this pumpkin. I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. Okay, so I think this is pretty good. I might go back and touch up a few more little places, but the idea is to get your colors nice and smooth on your pumpkin, blending together. You can keep working, like I said, going back and sharpening up some of your details. But the nice thing about colored pencils is that you can really work on blending colors together. And like I said, warm colors are really nice to blend together because you're never going to get muddy looking colors when you do that. Sometimes with other colors, if you're mixing, you can have that happen. So I'm going to work on the stem now, which is usually nice dark greens. So I've got a couple and a little bit of brown, sometimes even mixed there. It depends how old the pumpkin is. So if you want to make it all browns, you could with maybe some yellow. I'm going to use mostly these colors because they're next to each other on the color wheel as well. So I think I'm going to stick with the yellow, green, maybe just a touch of blue in there for some of the darker areas. But I also have some brown that I can go back on and use as a dark color too. So this time I think I'm going to start with my lighter places that I want highlighted, just to show you kind of a little different way to do it. Uh-oh, I see a spot here I want to make darker on the pumpkin. So that's the thing about art, is you always want to kind of go back and look and see. Just because you think you're done in one spot doesn't mean you necessarily have to be. So I'm going to kind of blend my greens and my yellows together. And I feel like maybe over here it might be just a little darker where it's twisting back. So I might leave some area where that can be a little darker in there. I'm also kind of coloring in a direction that my stem was growing, or the lines were on here, so that it seems to fit. Coloring direction really can make a big difference. All right, I'm going to add some darker greens in here now. I think right in here I'd have some really dark greens because they'll be in the shadow. So if yours is different though, you may have to put your shadows in a different place. It's okay to go over some of the brown too. So I'm not trying to cover up all of the yellow or the lighter green. I'm simply just trying to create a little more texture on that, add a little bit more life to that, get most of it. It's okay to leave a tiny bit of white for a highlight. And I think that looks kind of good. So I think this is a finished one. I'll show you some others here at the end that are perhaps a little different, so you can see how you can use different colors and different styles of gourds or pumpkins or squash to make your picture. I hope you have fun with this today. Remember, this might take a little while, so if this takes you, you might need to take a break in between, and that's okay to do also. Don't forget to sign your name when you're all done. Stay creative, everybody. Bye-bye. Remember, when you're making your pumpkin, your gourd, or your squash, to try to use at least 3 different colors, not to start right in the middle, have it a little off center, and to try to fill most of your paper with your picture, more than half of it. And you also need to try to work on blending those colors together and using value to help make the pumpkin, the gourd, or the squash feel round. And you can even work on the texture a little bit too by how you color it. All right, I hope you have a great day and stay creative. Bye.